Today, on behalf of myself, Diane Shoemaker, and Benjamin Brown, and Chris Soller. And you will have seen a little window pop up on your screen to indicate that this meeting is being recorded. So just hit continue and that will get out of your way. Our meeting today is the first of a three-part dairy mini-series that we're offering you this fall. And we're very happy to have with us today Mark Stephenson, and I'll be introducing him shortly. But also put on your calendar November 17th, when we'll be focusing on dairy fundamental outlook and trade, and November 24th, where we'll be looking at dairy risk management tools for producers. A couple kind of housekeeping items before we really jump into the meat of today's program. We really appreciate if you have any questions, if you want to submit those, you can see on your screen. Maybe you need to hover towards the bottom of your screen with your mouse, and it should pop up a little bar and it'll have a Q&A button. And if you click on that button, you'll be able to type in a question anytime during our program, and Ben Brown will be monitoring those questions as well. Or you can email him directly at brown.6888@osu.edu. If you're having any audio troubles, you'll be reading this because you can't hear me, but you can check on that join audio button, click on that. And the other thing to do is to make sure that your computer's speakers are not muted. Been there, done that one. We will be, as you know, recording today, and slides, the presentation, and the recording will be available at our farmoffice.osu.edu website. Click under events and then under archive videos. You can also share that link with others who also have interest and weren't able to be with us today. At the end of the program, as you exit, you will be directed to an evaluation, and we'd really appreciate if you take it. Shouldn't take you any more than 5 minutes. We have some educational objectives as we put together this series, and we'd also like to know how you would prefer to receive some further information and education, if this is a good platform, what times a day, and so forth. So appreciate you investing that last 5 minutes in that. So we really want to get into the meat of our program today, and very pleased to have Mark Stephenson with us today. Dr. Stephenson is the Director of Dairy Policy and Analysis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And in that position, he conducts and coordinates research and outreach activities related to the dairy industry. He is involved in applied research at the firm level, including milk assembly costs, processing costs, new processing technologies, farm costs, and price risk management. He's also active in sector level performance, including dairy policy, spatial milk pricing, international trade, and milk price forecasting. He has a second title as Director of Wisconsin Center for Dairy Profitability. And in that capacity, he works with faculty and staff coordinating a multidisciplinary approach to dairy farm level problem solving and planning. We invited him to Ohio, even though he's a native of Michigan, because he went to Michigan State University, where he received a bachelor's and master's degree, and then a second master's and a PhD in agriculture economics at Cornell University. So a little redemption there, but a tremendous amount of knowledge about the dairy industry and the very frustrating and complicated issues of dairy policy and milk pricing. So we very much appreciate you making time in your schedule today, Mark, to be with us and help us understand, how did we get to a negative $8 producer price differential here in Ohio? So welcome.
Well, thank you, Diane. I do appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to be here with you. And I think that it's great that we in the Great Lakes states have an opportunity, to play mischief in our elections, I think, because all of these states are apparently quite important to the outcome of an election, and they're quite important in this particular year. So we'll be watching that. Whoever thought, though, that we would be asking questions like, how did we get to a negative $8 PPD? I can honestly say that was something that most of us hadn't anticipated. We don't hope to see it. It's not just a negative $8 PPD. Occasionally we get a negative PPD, and that's a little bit annoying on a milk check. But, you know, they don't last long, and, you know, maybe it's negative less than $1. But $8, $6, $5, those kinds of things begin to look pretty big. So I'm going to have to back up and drag us just a little bit through the edge of the weeds anyway, to explain this, because I think it's pretty important you understand what we're doing with federal milk marketing pricing in this country. And so I'm going to try to take us through this. The questions that you probably need to ask that begin with, why do we do anything with milk pricing in the first place? We have plenty of countries in the world that don't have regulation, but we have a lot of major milk producing countries that have some level of regulation in milk prices. We aren't the most regulated, but you know, we've got some things that we do that are a little bit different. And you know, you might just ask, why have these countries that produced a lot of milk have regulation at all? You know, that why is it sprung up differently? Well, milk's got a lot of qualities that make it pretty unique. For one thing, it's highly perishable, and this is important. It means that when we produce it, we've got to get it to a processor, get it sold or packaged or in a bottle and off to the consumer pretty quickly. It's also a very bulky product. If you don't like the kind of price that's being offered to the plant that you're selling to, that it's probably relatively nearby, it's pretty expensive to go out and look at that alternative plant that might be maybe another 100 miles away. If you're picking up the transportation costs and you're hauling something that's close to 85% water, it's expensive to move that very many more miles down the road. So that becomes an issue for looking for a second buyer or an alternative buyer. It is produced 365 days a year, harvested that often, and has to be sold that often. It's different than corn or soybeans, where we can, you know, produce it and store them for a period of time until we get to maybe a price that we like better. We can't do that with milk. It also requires a lot of specialized assets. Something like a milking parlor, you know, you can put $500,000 into a modern milking parlor today without working extra hard at it. And that parlor is good for one thing, and that's milking a dairy cow. You can't milk a dairy goat in there. You sure can't do anything else with a parlor. It's going to milk dairy cows, period. And that's a lot of sunk costs. And those kind of sunk costs, we realize really are going to be used for milk production. So it makes milk kind of sticky. We don't just get into and out of it, or we don't decide to plant soybeans instead of corn this year. It's a specialized asset. We also have many more sellers, meaning dairy farms, than we have buyers, meaning plants. And we have a relatively inelastic demand for dairy products. Fancy economist term that basically means we can change the price a lot relative to the amount of milk that is being sold. So, you know, we do find that if we have something that changes the demand for milk, or even the supply of milk, you know, by 1 to 2%, we can have tremendous volatility in prices based on pretty small difference out there. And historically, when you've put all those things together, it's led to something we've called destructive competition, which means that you know, farms are susceptible to buyers of milk. And indeed, if buyers of milk, processors, were historically trying to find more market share for their product, and you know, if you're selling beverage milk, for example, pretty hard to distinguish your milk. It's white, it's cold, it's got the same nutrients as your competitor does. The only way you get a bigger market share is really by lowering the price. And what used to happen is that you would have a processor that would turn around and say, you know I paid you 5 cents a quart for your milk last week, but this week I can only pay you 4 cents. So that's destructive competition, and farmers were susceptible to that. So just to give you this very brief history of federal milk marketing orders, we saw back in the late 1800s, and a lot of what we have in a federal milk marketing order came from what co-ops were doing back then. Co-ops were having a hard time bargaining effectively, and that was particularly true during the Great Depression of the 1930s. And most people were convinced that co-ops just can't do it alone. And by the time we got to FDR in the White House, he was taking input from a lot of people to try a bunch of different things. And one of the things that came out of an Agricultural Adjustment Act was this idea about marketing agreements. This is where farmers and processors could sit down and make a decision about how much milk you're going to sell me, what's the price going to be. And if there's any dispute about that later on, you could have somebody settle that dispute, and you didn't have to go to a lawyer, or you had access to a judge to make that happen. That was a Marketing Agreement Act. And later that became a federal milk marketing order. Orders are very unique. One of the things is that they can only be voted in or out by dairy producers. So dairy farmers are the only people who get to vote about a federal milk marketing order. That includes changes to an order as well. We also find that dairy processors are the only ones that are regulated under a federal order. Farmers aren't regulated. Dairy processors are regulated. And there's a very important distinction here. Class 1 processors, the ones who are putting milk in a bottle and selling beverage milk, are the only ones who must be regulated if you have a federal order. All the rest of them, manufacturers like cheese makers or yogurt makers or others, may be regulated. They're the ones that get to choose whether they want to be regulated or not. And if we have changes or a new order being brought into being, like the California order was just a few years ago, we have to go through a hearing process. And it's a very open process where anybody can, and I do literally mean anybody, can come and offer opinions about the scope of the hearing and what's being requested for change. And, USDA is really required to issue a very balanced kind of fair recommendation under this after they listen to everybody's input. And then you, the dairy farmers that are getting to vote on this, don't get to vote on just the change that's being asked for or looked at. You are voting on the entire milk marketing order with this new change. So if you decide you don't like what's being offered, the whole thing goes away. Or you can accept the fairness of what USDA has recommended and voted in. And that's the way that you restore this balance of power between processors and farmers. Only farmers vote, only processors are regulated, but the hearing process for making changes that are imposed on dairy processors has to be done in a very fair and open process. Now, there are only two tools, really, that a federal milk marketing order has. Lots of rules behind all those things, but only two real tools. One of them we call classified pricing, and that means that we pay differently for milk depending on what it was used to make. I can't think of any other product that we really do something like that. I mean, with no different characteristics in the input or ingredient. So, for example, if you're selling corn into a market, it really doesn't matter if it's used to make cornmeal, or if it's used to make ethanol, or if it's used to feed pigs. The price you receive for that corn is going to be whatever the price of corn is in that region. With milk, it's different. You can have milk that's going from one farm to a cheese plant, and they'll pay a different amount for it than the milk that's going to a beverage plant. And you can also imagine that probably could create some problems between farmers. If the farmer was to receive what the plant was paying for it, everybody would want to send their milk to a fluid plant because that's generally the higher milk price. And so the way we get around that in federal orders is through pooling. And that is we share revenue among producers. So there's no real fighting for what plant your milk goes to. It tries to go to the closest plant, the one where the hauling is not going to be too big. Our markets are regional. They're based on the territory where fluid milk bottlers compete for sales. So in the Middle East market there in Ohio, it's covering a pretty fair territory. It used to be just a small territory, you know, like Cincinnati or Cleveland, so the markets were small. But since bottlers are moving milk over longer distances, those markets have become much larger in geography. And there are values that differ based on class 1 differentials and the amount of milk used in the different classified pricings. So class 1 differentials are generally the highest where milk is most deficit. So think of the Southeast, like Florida, where we have big differentials down there, and they're lowest in areas like Idaho or even in the upper Midwest, where we've got a lot of cows and not so many people. Federal orders have grown in size. I should have updated this chart. This doesn't even show where California joined. We now have 10 federal orders, and they are pricing milk, that's approaching 80%, with California involved in that. So a fair amount of the milk in this country, but not all the milk. So federal orders are pricing most of the milk, but not all of it. Now, when you look at this over a much longer sweep of time, this chart is showing you that back in the 1940s, under federal milk marketing orders, about 65% of the milk in this country was class 1 or beverage milk. There was only a small amount that was manufacturing. Today, class 1 milk is about 32%, and the rest of it, more than 2/3 of the milk, is used for manufacturing purposes, cheese and yogurt and powder and butter, those kind of things. So the real question is, how do you price milk? Now, this is what an economist thinks about, that we've got supply, which is to say, if the price is high, as you can see on the left-hand side of this graphic, then farmers would be willing to produce more milk, more quantity. When price is low, you're not willing to produce so much. And consumers will buy more dairy products if that price is low than they will when the price is high. So there's only one place where buyers and sellers agree, and this is kind of this magical area that we call a market clearing price and quantity. And that's where we want to price. If we were trying to say, what's the value of milk this month, we'd want to pick this price that is right here. And, these look like fine, thin lines, but the truth is we don't actually know what that is in any given month. We know when it's not quite right because we see evidence of stocks being built or being too tight or something, but we don't exactly know what that price is. In fact, this is what the reality is. There is some range around which prices are right. So should the price be here, this high, or down here? We want to get this, but we can't always hit the center of the target. So if you're going to make an error and you're setting minimum prices, and that's what plants must pay for milk, if you set it here where it's high on the high range side, look what happens. At this kind of level, you're in this real region over here, and you're producing quite a bit of milk. And if you look at that same price and say, well, how much do consumers want? They only want this much. Well, what about this bit in the middle right here that consumers didn't want, but farmers wanted to produce? That's stocks. Those are going to go up. That's the price too high. The market's not clearing. What about down here when the price is too low? Well, farmers aren't happy. They're going to produce only this much, but at that price, consumers want more. And at a low price like this, at least we can do something, since it's a minimum price, that is federal order or over order premiums being paid, voluntary premiums. And when we do that, we can work our way back up here, let the markets react to get to this kind of price. And that's what we do. We are setting a price that's lower than market clearing levels, and we let the premiums in the market work to get us back up here. What are the options? Well, we used to have this thing called the MW price, Minnesota, Wisconsin price. That was based on grade B milk, which can't be used for fluid purposes, so it can't be priced in a federal milk marketing order. But we could look at that. We had a bunch of cheese plants and powder and butter plants in the upper Midwest that bought grade B milk. And, they set the price. That price changed a little bit every week. Just a negotiation between buyers and sellers. Small cheese plants, small dairy farmers determine the price. We surveyed them and we said, that's a good starting point. Let's use that. We'll start there and we'll use that in the federal order to begin our price. But that became hard to achieve because there's very little grade B milk in this country anymore. So we had to abandon that and go to something else. Product price formulas are what we actually use today. And it's a competitive pay price still, but we have to move up the marketing level one notch. If you're thinking about, well, let's just serve or survey our cheese manufacturers or our yogurt makers or fluid plants and see what they're paying for milk, but we're going to use that to tell them what to pay, that's circular. It doesn't work. But we can go in and we can think about, let's consider the market prices for dairy products, not the milk price, and then see if we can back into a milk price from it. That's what we do. There are other things. Other countries have like administratively determined prices. That's kind of what we have in Canada. We can also use economic formulas, but we have very few of those kind of things around the world that are using an economic formula. So this is what we do. Initially we used this MW, and that was, we had a price that was determined right between farms and plants. That's competitive pay price. Then from the plants, of course, the product goes down to a supermarket and then ultimately to the consumer. The product price formulas are saying, this isn't working anymore. So let's go down here and look at the wholesale price before we get to the supermarket for products like cheese or butter. And we'll try to impute what that value of milk was that went into those products. That's what we use. Classified pricing, we have 4 classes in federal orders, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Class 1 is usually the highest price. That's beverage milk use. Class 2 is a whole big catch-all category we call soft dairy products. Those are things like ice cream, cream cheese, yogurt, a lot of products in Class 2, but it's not a big volume of milk. Class 3 are milk that's used for making hard cheeses like mozzarella or cheddar. Class 4 is butter and milk powders. So skim milk powder, non-fat dry milk powder, a bunch whole milk powder is going to be in Class 4. And that's usually, but not always, the lowest price. So if you take a look at that listing out there, I'd ask a question. What's consistent with that ordering in there? What do you notice? And, you might tell me a bunch of things, but one thing is that this has something to do with perishability. These Class 1 products are the most perishable. The shelf life on beverage milk, when I was younger, used to be like 12 days or 14 days. And now we often see it 21 days or more. Milk is cleaner, it's packaged better, it lasts a little bit longer, but it's still highly perishable. If you take products like ice cream, you can freeze that and you can store it for months if you need to. Well, ice cream is frozen, but can be stored for months. Yogurt, has much better keeping qualities. It can be stored for a long period of time too before its code date is up. Hard cheeses, even longer. And when you get down to butter and powder, those can be stored for months, if not years, with only modest deterioration. So, these products down here help you balance a marketplace because you can store them for a period of time. These products have to be sold pretty quickly. That's what's consistent with that ordering down there. And I would say that these whole ideas of classified pricing and pooling were cooperative ideas, and they go all the way back to the Boston market in the 1880s. And that was 60 years before we had federal orders. So what's pooling? Here's an example. We have classified prices over here. I'm just saying $20 for class 1, $18.50 for class 2, $18 for class 3, and $17.50 for class 4. And this is the utilization in this fictitious order that I've got, roughly something like we see in the US. If you multiply these two things, you're going to get $8. That's a contribution to the pool, and so forth. You add all of those up, and we now end up with a blend or uniform price of $18.80. That's what farmers are going to receive. And all we have to do now is to make sure that this is the way plants pay into that pool, and this is what gets drawn out by dairy farmers. Who's regulated? Remember, those class 1 must be, the other processors can be. Why would they choose to be? Well, it's a pool of dollars. And if you are a cheese plant, if you take a look back here at this regulation, you see, look, I have to pay $18 into the pool as a contribution, or my obligation here, but the value is $18.80. If I draw 80 cents out of this total pool to put with my $18, then I can pay my dairy farmers $18.80, and they're much happier than receiving $18 when some other folks might have been adding or getting $20. So that's the way it works. There's an equalization payment that goes to a cheesemaker so they can pay this $18.80. And the cost of doing all of this for plants like a cheese plant is that there's more paperwork. You're going to have auditors in there from the federal order that are going through your business and wanting to make sure that you paid what you should have for the amount of components that you got. And there's also a thing we call performance. If class 1 processors needed extra milk at some point in time, you'd have to be willing to give some of your milk up. That doesn't mean you give it to them for free, but you can't process it. You need to make sure that the class 1 plant gets it. And of course, that means that maybe the production run you were expecting is going to be a little bit lighter. Or you take milk on a weekend or, seasonally when perhaps you didn't want it. It wasn't optimal to you, but you're helping provide balancing to a system. And for that, you get to take some money out of the pool. So that's what happens here. The class 1 processors have to contribute $1.20 to this fictitious pool I'm showing. Class 2 would be able to draw 30 cents from it. Class 3 would get to draw 80 cents, and class 4, $1.30. That would be the way that it normally works. If you have to be pooled, are there benefits? Sure. You know what your competitors are paying. So a bottler knows that I'm paying $20 for my milk, and I know that the other bottler in the area has to pay that much too. And performance helps assure manufacturing plants of milk supply. For a bottling plant, we have different timing that goes on. And the advanced pricing there means that you get to know what your milk is going to cost you before you actually buy it. A cheese plant doesn't know that. Their milk is priced after they've already used it. Here's a kind of calendar. I'm just showing examples of the milk price in February of 2018. Milk for class 3, for example, is always priced on the Wednesday that's on or before the 5th of the following month. So if you look here at the 5th, that's not a Wednesday. You have to go back to the last Wednesday. which would be the 28th in this case. And that's when a cheesemaker would know what the milk cost them that came into their plant for all of these days in February. A class 1 processor, however, gets to know what their price for February milk is going to cost them on the Wednesday that is on or before the 23rd of the prior month. So here's the 23rd. That means that on the 17th, a fluid milk processor is going to get advanced prices and know what his February milk cost is going to be. So it's based on surveys of products sold at wholesale level. It's a more accurate reflection of the product value if you look back when you've got all the data for the month, and that's what's true for class 3 and 4. But it's a better business model for the processor to know what your inputs are going to cost you before you actually use them. That's what class 1 gets to do. So how does this classified pricing work? Here's a product stream example for a cheese plant. We take in milk, maybe some other ingredients, and that could be skim milk that we bought or powder or something else. We might spin off some cream, but we're making cheese, our primary product, but we get whey as a co-product. We could make just dried sweet whey with it. We can further fracture that dried sweet whey, and we can make a whey protein concentrate and lactose. We can spin off some cream, and that could be made into butter, but that's the ingredient stream that can come out of a plant. We want to price milk, and what we need to do is to look at the endpoint products here. And there can be, in this case, several, but we pick 3. Let's look at the cheese. Let's look at the dry whey. Let's look at the butter. Those are all the products that can come out of a cheese plant. And that's exactly what we do. Every week, we get a report that's called the National Dairy Product Sales Report. And it tells you for these weeks that are shown here, what the average price was, in this case for butter. You see butter prices and sales, how many pounds were sold at that. And that's where we get the value of butter. This goes through a formula then. This butter price out here for the month is subtracting something that's called a make allowance. And that's literally how much it costs you to turn milk into a pound of butter. So this says that about 17 cents is what it cost a plant to churn a pound of butter. This other factor that's over here is referred to as the yield factor. And this said, if I had 1 pound of butter fat, I could literally make 1.2 pounds of butter, because butter is not 100% butter fat. It's about 80%. So these things go into this simple formula to generate what you receive on the farm as a butter fat price. Other prices like protein is a little bit more complicated, but not much. They all have the same elements in it. So I'm not going to go through those, but those are what the product price formulas are. So all these things with classified pricing and the product price formulas and what plants are paying for milk all tells us how big is the pie out here. That's our price discovery and classified pricing. How much in the way of dollars are we going to have in the federal order to be paid to dairy producers? The next thing we have to figure out, though, is how are the producers paid out of that pie? Well, we're paid on component values that are based on class 3 prices. So if you look at class 3 pricing, there's butter fat, there's protein, and there's other solids in there. The value of other solids is mostly lactose. And then there's something usually that's left over. And that's what we call the producer price differential. It's just a residual. It's a simple calculation, an accounting calculation, if you will. And if we paid out more in component values than we had in the pool, that PPD is going to be negative. It's just that simple. So we had a pie and we shared it in a different way, and what's left over becomes the PPD. So this is for January 2020 in Federal Order 33. you can see that 43% of the value that was taken into the market in the pool that month was paid out as butterfat to dairy farmers. 48% of the value of that pool was paid out as protein. 4% was paid out as other solids. We also make some adjustments for somatic cell. That accounted for about 1% of the value. Excuse me. But we had a little bit left over in the pool to spurts out among dairy farmers, and we pay that out on a hundredweight basis. That was about 4% of the value of the pool. So that's how we split up the pie. If we paid out more for components in butterfat, protein, other solids than we had in total in the pool, I think you can see that the PPD is going to be negative. That's the way we get a negative PPD. It's that simple. But let's ask ourselves, when will they be negative? One way that can happen is when prices are rapidly rising. So just as an example, we go back to that calendar. These prices for class 1 are going to be determined, based on values for early January. And if prices are rising rapidly from January on through February, the cheese value of milk is going to be based on cheese prices, that happened back in February. So we can pay more out in cheese values here than was reflected at the time that the class 1 values were made up. That's when class 1 is usually lower than class 3 or 4. So timing can be a reason for negative PPDs. And historically, that's when we usually had a negative PPD. And the other thing I would say is, when PPDs are negative under these circumstances and I'm a dairy farmer, I'm not going to get mad at that. I'm going to say, bring it on, give it to me every time, because a negative PPD means that my price is going up rapidly. So I'll take it. But there's now another thing that can happen. We can also get a very large spread between class 3 and class 4 prices. We used to price class 1 based on the higher of class 3 or class 4 prices. When you did that, the spread never really impacted prices very much. But in the last Farm Bill at the end of 2019, we had Congress say, let's change that. Let's go through and require that federal orders make it the average of class 3 and class 4, not the higher of class 3 or class 4. The reason they did that was so that it would be easier for people to hedge class 1 milk. You had a better idea. Doesn't matter who it's higher. If you knew what the average was going to be of class 3 and 4, you can hedge it much more easily. But I think it was short-sighted. We didn't actually think that, when this spread gets big, if we pay a lot out in class 3, that spread can be so big that causes negative PPDs. And that's happening now. So under the equalization payment that I told you plants get to make and draw, class 1 plants are normally making an equalization into the pool, and manufacturing plants get to take a draw out of the pool. Those payments are exactly equal to the uniform blend price minus the class price. That way, there's exactly enough money to pay producers the blend price. That's how all of that works. But let's take a look at what happens when we have either a timing issue or a spread issue. In this case, I'm looking at a timing issue. Now I'm saying that we've got, what normally happens, that the class 1 would be contributing $1.20, the others get to take a draw out. But it could be inverted and different. The PPD becomes negative. It means the class 3 price is greater than the uniform price. And under that circumstance, class 3 plants would have to make an equalization payment into the pool, not taking it out. Other plants would get to draw from that. Only class 1 plants have to be regulated. Class 3 plants or any manufacturing plant can choose to opt out of the pool if they want to do that. And when that happens, they're no longer bound by federal order regulations about minimum prices or anything else. And they would get to keep that equalization payment. And they get to then choose what they're going to pay producers in the way of prices. So let's just look at that. In this case, if we said that the blend price is still $18.80, but now the class 1 price is only $18, fluid manufacturers here would get to take an 80-cent draw from the pool instead of contributing. But here, if the cheese price or class 3 price is actually $20 and the blend price calculated is $18.80, they would have to make a $1.20 payment into the pool. So they, under those circumstances, might say, I'm out of the pool. I don't want to be in this month. What happens if they depool? What would plants choose to pay? I'm going to throw out a few options here. One thing, if they were just being all kinds of above board, you know what the class 3 price is. They could say, well, I like my producers. I'm going to pay them the class 3 price. That's $20. I don't have to, but I'm going to, because that would be my obligation. But this way, rather than share it with that yogurt plant or those class 1 bottlers, I'm giving it all to my dairy farmers, $20. The other thing they might say is, well, I know what the uniform price is that was calculated for the pool, $18.80, and I could do that. That way I've saved that $1.20. I don't have to pay that to my dairy farmers. I don't have to pay that to any fluid plant or anybody else. I've saved the $1.20, and my dairy farmers are no worse off because they're getting at least this blend price, $18.80. Or they could pay something else. They can pay literally anything they want to. What do? Well, you can calculate this. And I'm showing you some calculations over here. I'm starting with June of 2020. And these were the class prices that existed. And I've got these highlighted out here. And this is for the Middle East, order 33. I've got these in red showing up anytime that the class 3 price is going to be greater than the estimated uniform price. Under those circumstances, you have a negative PPD if everybody stayed into the pool. And notice up here, sorry, I'm just showing you what the utilization roughly is of class 1, 2, 3, and 4 if everybody stayed in the order 33. It's a negative PPD. So if all of the plants, cheese plants, decided that they were going to depool because they didn't want to contribute $5.74 to the pool and share that with everybody else, then that actually changes the pool price. The uniform price goes down. And based on that, you can see now that that PPD becomes even bigger and more negative, as much as $8.44 here if everybody depooled. Here's what actually happened. It was a negative $7.05. So obviously not quite everybody depooled. A lot of people did, but this was the most optimistic you could have. This was the most pessimistic. This is what actually happened. Here's what happened when you had an $8 negative PPD. That happened in July for Federal Order 33. It's close, to the estimated worst, but not quite everybody depooled. And you can see what's going on over here. Again, in this case, it was a little bit more than what was estimated at the max, and that was because the utilizations were a bit different. Same thing here. But I want you to notice that I'm estimating negative PPDs right on through. This is based on futures market prices, mind you, for class 3 and 4, and estimating class 1 and 2 prices. So I'm estimating negative PPDs for quite a few more months, at least until we get into the late winter months here around February and March. At that point in time, and then there may not be as big an incentive to depool. So that's one of the things you get. What actually happened out here? Well, let's take a look. This was for this July month, where you actually had a negative $8 PPD. Let's take a look at what the calculations were by order 33. The uniform price was about $14. The PPD was negative $7. Excuse me, I guess this was the month before. Sorry about that. And the class 3 price was $21. So that's where we get the negative values from. But, we can also look and see through another survey that's done weekly, and that's what the National Ag Statistics Service does. They survey dairy plants and ask them, what did you pay for milk? Okay, so this is not what the minimum price was. This is what did you actually pay? And that includes the component levels. That includes overorder premiums that were paid to farms and all the rest. But you can see for Ohio that this all milk price for Ohio for July was $18.70. That's considerably more than we're looking at here. So, I think that what happened was that it wasn't the $21 that the cheese price was, class 3 price, but it was substantial. So they actually decided to provide quite a bit of payment to farms that was more than the minimum. And you can also begin to see that out here. This is a chart that I'm just showing you that shows what the Ohio all milk price is minus the order 33 blend price. There's a little bit of ups and downs in this thing, but generally speaking, that's in the $1.50 range. So that means that your overorder premiums are roughly in that $1.50 range, as long as you don't have major depooling. But here's that particular month of July. And you'll notice here that this was $4.71 that got paid out above what that minimum price, blend price was. So they paid out a great deal more in that particular month. This month right here, if you're looking at it, that was April, and you say, holy mackerel, what happened then? This was way below federal order price. Well, you remember what we were doing in April. We had too much milk. We had milk being dumped. We had a lot of distressed milk sales, which means you can pay anything you want to try to get that milk to go away. And we had a lot of milk under class sales. So that was what this big negative basis was there. What are issues? I'm trying to wrap up now. Federal milk marketing orders were really built around fluid milk plants way back in the 1930s. And what we've got is the mechanism and the ideas of a fluid milk institution that's trying to operate in effectively a manufacturing milk world now. So this $3 differential that we used to have on top of a $5 manufacturing price when class 1 utilization was more than 60% represented a lot of money. It was 26% of your milk check. Even if we had paid on a basis of components and PPDs back then, which we didn't, you would not have had negative PPDs because there's a lot of money coming from class 1. But, when we've got a $3 differential on top of a $16 manufacturing price and class 1 utilization is less than 30%, it's not much money. It's maybe only 5% of your milk check. So we can run out of money when we're paying in components. That causes some problems out here. And one other issue I'll throw out there is that processors are also in need of relief. I know that it always looks like it's us against them, but it's not the case. I mean, we're all in the dairy industry together. Those make allowances that are in the federal milk marketing orders under the product price formulas now are the relief that processors get for being pooled. And it tries to cover the cost of manufacturing their dairy products. Those haven't been looked at or considered in more than a decade. And essentially, you can say that processors haven't had relief in that since that time period. So what happens, if you're not making money as a processor, you might say, well, it's simple. Let's just raise the price. So I raise the price of my cheese that I sell, but that gets captured back in that survey because that survey is mandatory. They must do it. When that happens, it turns around, it comes back in a higher milk price for them later on. They can't get away from it. So they have to consider make allowance. And I think that it will mean that we'll be going to a federal order hearing over the next year or two. This is a big question. How does milk price evolve? So I can't tell you that I know how it happens. I just leave that as a question that we hang with. And I'd be happy to take some questions now from you folks if you've got them.
Thank you, Mark. So we'll open up if there's any questions for Mark. Please, I just put those in the Q&A and we can grab them that way. Ben didn't get any directly to him via email. So I'll start with a question, Mark. In our current system, fluid beverage milk processors are those that have to participate in the federal order system, and the others have a choice. What would be the pros and cons of requiring all processors to participate in the federal order system?
Well, I'm going to just suggest to you that we have a system that has provided a bit of a carrot in there. You get to take a draw from the pool. That's a positive thing. That entices folks to participate. What we've had in the past is not the requirement to participate in a pool because it's a relief valve. If we're regulating, sometimes we know that there's going to be a problem. We don't always know what the problem will be or when that problem will show up. But if it's a bad enough problem, if you can't actually make money, for example, under a federal milk marketing order, then you can always choose to opt out of it. And at that point in time, you pay what you need to pay to get milk into the door of your plant. Maybe it'll be less, maybe it'll be more, but you're not participating in the pool. California, as it was considering becoming a federal milk marketing order here a few years ago, had the co-ops request mandatory pooling because there's so little class 1 milk in that pool. They knew that it were going to be depooling every month. It was only a matter of who would depool. Would it be class 3 this month or class 4 or maybe class 2 even? And they asked for mandatory pooling. And that was a bridge too far. USDA said, no, we aren't going to give you that. So I'm not sure that that would happen, Diane. I think we have to look at other solutions, for trying to avoid this. And I want you to walk away at least with the knowledge that this is mostly a accounting issue that's happening with negative PPDs. It's not that somebody's taking money out of your milk check, but it's a matter of who this gets to be shared with. So a dairy farmer that sees this negative PPD should realize that maybe the person that they're shipping milk to didn't want to share that PPD with all the other dairy farmers in Federal Order 33. They wanted to share it with their producers. So, that's part of a negative PPD calculation too, you have to think about.
So just to follow up on that, how did California resolve that challenge with their low class 1 utilization as they formulated their federal order rules?
They didn't. I mean, because it wasn't even offered for them to vote on, right? They have pooling just like we do. And what they did was to make it pretty easy to get into the pool and out of the pool. If you look at some of your neighbors, like over in the Northeast, for example, they have pretty stringent pooling requirements. So if you choose to get out of the pool in the Northeast, um, it there's only a short period of time when you can get back into the pool in any given year. So you may not choose to get out because that qualification for the pool happens only at a time that may not be conducive to depooling. So there are pooling requirements that can be more rigid or less rigid, but you always have to give people the opportunity to get out right now if they don't want to participate.
Great, thanks. We do have a question. There's a couple parts to that question, so let me break it out for you. First question is, how often do manufactured milk processors depool?
Well, we don't always know that. We have to check with Federal Milk Marketing Orders, and they're not always going to tell you if a plant is in the pool this month or out of the pool. That's kind of private business for a lot of those plants. But we also have this thing that's called partial pooling in a lot of federal orders. So you can have a separate bay, to receive milk in a plant and a separate silo to have it in, because the accounting has to check and see how much milk you brought in is pooled milk versus unpooled milk. And we can have plants that are only partially pooled or partially regulated. So I can't always tell you, excuse me, how much milk is depooled in a given month, but you know it. When you see the utilizations down quite a bit, that means that there just wasn't as much milk in the pool.
Okay. The second part of that question was, are there usually seasonal changes to this? Would holidays and butter and cheese sale increases impact that pooling, depooling decision?
The pooling and depooling decision depends entirely on whether you think there's an economic incentive involved. So, for example, it's difficult, but not an impossibility to project or forecast, what those PPDs are going to be, or whether you would be contributing to the pool as opposed to not. Sometimes you may have a small contribution, that PPD might be a negative 20 cents or something, and you only anticipate that for a month or so. If you thought it was always going to be 20 cents, why would you be pooled ever, right? You just decide, I want out of that pool. That doesn't make sense to me. And we do have some regions of market orders that might be in far off zones where that could happen, and plants just don't pool. It's independent. But we do have decisions that are made where they're trying to forecast. And if I think next month is going to be a 20-cent contribution to the pool, but after that, probably not, I probably wouldn't get out of the pool. It's not big enough. I'll just contribute the 20 cents this month, and I'm done with it. Partly because the paperwork can be hard, or it may be difficult, in places like Northeast to get back into the pool.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. The last piece of that question, I can handle this one. Are the federal milk marketing orders on a regional or state basis? And Mark referred to, we are in Federal Order 33 here in Ohio, so they are more regional. It's most of Ohio and then parts of surrounding states. They don't go by state lines, primarily they're regions. So we do share our federal milk market administrator with surrounding states, parts of those surrounding states. We are coming up on 1 o'clock, and a big thank you, Mark, for zooming in here with us today. And just wrap this up. I'm going to share my screen for just a second. A reminder that we are going to have 2 more sessions. If you can, Mark, can you see that on your screen?
I can.
Okay, my green glowing box is missing. So we have 2 more sessions. This gave us a good foundation of this milk pricing system and hopefully brought some clarity to why we get these negative milk producer price differentials. So again, a big thank you, Mark. That was an excellent presentation. Also, you will have, since you registered for the series, you'll be getting reminders for our 2nd session and 3rd session, November 17th on dairy markets and outlook. And on the 24th of November, dairy risk management tools for producers. A couple other things coming up. If you have not been involved in the Ohio Farm Business Analysis and Benchmarking Program, especially as we get into looking at risk management strategies, knowing your farm's cost of production, that real total true cost of production is critical, and this program can help you there. We have a dairy labor management certificate course scheduled for January and February coming up. This will be virtual over that kind of 12:30, 2 p.m. Grab lunch and then pull up to the computer. We have some great speakers lined up for that, and that registration will be coming out soon. And as you close out of today's program, please take those few minutes and go through that evaluation. We'd appreciate any assistance you can give us there. So thank you for joining us at Ohio State University Extension and our co-sponsors, the Ohio Dairy Producers Association, for this program today, and have a good rest of your day.